You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340.
Hello and welcome to another version of the Atheist Forum. I'm Jim Peterson. I'm here in the WTN studios with Joe Reinhardt.
Hello.
And Judy Atkins.
Hi.
And we even have a peanut gallery here too. But at any rate, be that as it may. What we're going to do today is a little bit different. We're going to analyze a recent speech by our Attorney General and talk about some of the issues involved. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, that is, and he gave the speech just a few days ago on July 30th, Monday, and in it he justifies the creation of a religious liberty task force. And I'm just going to give a few quotes from this, maybe more than a few, and that are particularly interesting, and perhaps our other participants here will have some comments about it. One sentence here in which he proclaims, quote, "A dangerous movement, undetected by many, is now challenging and eroding our great tradition of religious liberty. There can be no doubt. There is no little matter. It must be confronted and defeated." Any idea what he means by a dangerous movement? Is anybody aware of that?
Well, the fact that Christianity, along with all other religions, most other religions, are receding. If it weren't for the birth rate, in a lot of cases, they're actually shrinking. And that's because more and more people are coming to realize that the arguments that they present are somewhat specious, to say the least. I hardly see that as being an attack on them necessarily.
Well, I disagree because I think the attack is they're required to pay for contraception, they're required to serve gays, they're required to do all kinds of things that they find reprehensible.
They're required to feed blacks and people of other
Yes,
nationalities
exactly.
who just come right up to the lunch counter
Yes.
uninvited.
Yes.
They're required to just stand there while people of the same sex get married,
Yes.
while people of different races get married.
Yes.
And by this standard, I guess they're under attack.
They
Is
are
that
under
the
attack,
argument?
being forced to.
So we'd say that the people who have a certain vested interest in what they regard as the American tradition.
Yes.
That is an old tradition that existed from back in the 19th century all the way up into the 50s and 60s, and pretty much was under attack starting in the 60s, where large groups of people, notably college students, decided that they wanted to question some of these old and archaic ideas that had ruled the roost for so long. And this is the period during which Jim Crow was overthrown, finally, although its vestiges linger on and still need to be dealt with. But these people feel that a way of life has been taken away from them in much the same way that people in the South, white people in the South, feel that the Civil War deprived them of a way of life, a kind of society, as depicted in, say, Gone with the Wind, that they no longer have access to.
Well, and I think it started with the civil rights movement more than necessarily the anti-war movement of the 60s. I think the civil rights movement was...
It preceded the,
Yeah.
but of course the anti-war movement was far more powerful precisely because it involved white people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
And so just out of sheer numbers, there would have been more anti-war people. I was fortunate enough to live in Washington, D.C. in 1967, marched on the Pentagon in 68. I have a very close firsthand knowledge of many of the activities that went on at that time. And of course, the way that they defeated it in large part, or have really set back that movement, was to put a lot of those people are still waiting to get out of jail.
Yeah.
For blowing up an ROTC office or shooting a policeman, or worst of all, being in possession of some illegal substance.
Ah, yes.
Now, when you can't put somebody in jail for saying that white people are devils, you can put them in jail for a long time for having a little white powder that you just to be on the safe side, brought with you.
Although, to assure our listeners, I think we all agree here that we're kind of opposed to the notion of killing and bombing as a way of.
Well, I
getting
certainly
over-
am, yes.
Well, not only you, but I'm sure.
I don't want to
Joe
speak
over
for
here-
anyone else.
All I am saying is give war a chance.
Yes.
I believe we did that. It didn't work out too well.
I want to just
Yeah,
digress
go
1
ahead.
second on what Mr. Sessions said about the religious traditions in this country being under attack. Perhaps he's unaware that one of the reasons that Thomas Jefferson was a deist and a non-believer in Christianity was that as a younger man, he witnessed the Baptists being
Right.
whipped in the streets, and for that reason, he was kind of turned off to the idea. But is that the kind of religious tradition that Mr. Sessions hopes to go back to? Because if they need anybody to go out and whip some Baptists in the street, I'm here to help.
You want to volunteer? Well, now,
Let's start with Mr. Sessions. He's a Baptist.
I'm sure he would be anxious to volunteer to help out in that regard.
He may need to be
Yes.
corrected.
Well, let me move on here to another thought that he's given us so much to deal with here. Quote, this election, that is the election of 2016, and much that has flowed from it, gives us a rare opportunity to arrest these trends. Such a reversal will not be done with electoral victories, but by intellectual victories, which sounds like a challenge to thinking people everywhere. Do you think we can meet that challenge?
Well, you can go back to Martin Luther, the original Martin Luther, saying that knowledge is the enemy of faith, and that faith should be taught, even if it requires the whips and chains, and that learning should be discouraged, and has been discouraged by almost all religions at every level, for the simple reason that the more you know, the less likely you are to be superstitious, the less likely you are to believe in the ability of other beings to influence everything from the weather to the frequency of earthquakes. John Wesley once delivered a very famous sermon on the cause and cure of earthquakes. Good for a laugh, I promise you.
Oh, you're just going to tease us with that?
Well,
Divulge what the cause?
I don't want to, a little spoiler alert,
Yeah,
but it
I
has a lot to
understand.
do with Sabbath breaking. So those of you, who are worried about being swallowed up by the San Andreas fault, better make it on down to Wednesday night, Vespers, and we want to see you on Sunday morning, cash in hand.
That's right. That's the important part. It seems to me that that quote you gave from Martin Luther was simply an expression of a thought which goes all the way back many thousands of years, ever since the first priest wrote down what he considered to be the holy words, whatever that happened to be.
Right, when
You can't argue with those now. They come from the deity. But let's move on here to another fabulous thought. Quote, we have gotten to the point where courts have held that morality cannot be a basis for law, where ministers are fearful to affirm, as they understand it, Holy Writ from the pulpit, and where one group can actively target religious groups by labeling them a hate group on the basis of their sincerely held religious beliefs.
And the group that he's talking about there specifically, well, most likely because he used this group when he was setting up this Liberty Task Force thing, is a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. Now, normally I would be a member of that group, but when you look at their site, they are homophobic, anti-birth control, anti-Planned Parenthood, anti-abortion, choice. And it is quite frightening, actually, to think that these are the people he consulted and want to bring us back to the traditions.
I think he consulted them probably because Fred Phelps is already dead.
Yes. And that brings me to my whole thing about the
Fred Phelps with the
Westboro Baptist Church.
a very extreme
Yes.
group.
Much of the anti-homosexuality rhetoric and basis in the Bible is from Leviticus. And my question to these people is, are they going to start enforcing all aspects of what's prohibited in Leviticus? Starting with barbecue. We can't have any more barbecue pork. Can't have mixed fabric clothing. Can't lie, cheat, or steal. I think Trump would be in big trouble with most of those prohibitions, not to mention adultery. And women will have to be isolated during their period for 7 days. And then, of course, there's the sacrifices that have to be made to the priest at the temple. When anyone sins, they have to take an animal that's blemish-free to the temple to be sacrificed by the priest. And after childbirth, of course, assuming the woman lives through it, because we won't have much medical care, because if we're going to base our society on the Bible. But the good news is that the mutton people will be happy, because one of the things that she has to sacrifice is a lamb. So, we'll see a big increase in sheep farming.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is to make sure that the sacrifice is blemish-free, because
Yes.
The best cuts have to be reserved for the priests.
And
Yes.
the Old Testament allows for the Jewish people to sell fetid meat or roadkill to the people of other nations who frequent and trade with them. But amongst themselves, they have much more strict dietary rules, of course, even back then. One of which was that you can't have two different kinds of food on the same plate.
Right.
And you
can't mix milk and meat and
you
all kinds of weird
can't,
things.
of course, eat anything that doesn't have a cloved hoof, and certainly nothing that is a crustacean. It has to
Right.
have fins. It has to have gills. So all of you who are thinking of heading to Red Lobster tonight, we'll see you in hell.
Well, it is red lobster, after all.
I was just wondering about gator meat. Would gator come? It doesn't have scales, but it swims. So I think it would
That's
not.
tough. I mean, I'd have to look up reptiles in general.
Well, reptile is because you can't eat anything that rubs its belly on the ground when it moves.
Yeah, I don't think you can eat alligator.
I don't think
I don't
so.
think
But
you'd be able
gators
to.
get up on their all fours, because we
Yeah,
saw
but
one once.
they flop
run.
along.
Yeah,
But here
but-
you can see the disputes that occupied religious scholars for endless hours as they
Yes.
strove to figure out
Not
exactly what
man
was
again.
about different kinds of food that you cause them to be forbidden or not, which is all silly.
Yeah, and of course, many of the punishments for this is the death penalty. So now I guess the Pope is in trouble, since he came out against the death penalty. He is against what's in the Bible.
He certainly is. It's a sin. If you hate your parents, it's a sin
Yes.
not to kill your children.
Yes.
So it's not a crime to hate your parents, but it is a crime and a sin not to kill them.
Right.
Well, this is so complicated.
It is.
I sometimes am at a loss as to why I even broke out that axe in the first place. I forgot why.
In earlier life, that's
Yes.
easy
I
board
forgot why I got it out.
Well, let's move on to another really stimulating part of the speech. Actually, I'm just going phrase by phrase here. Quote, "This president and this Department of Justice are determined to protect and even advance this magnificent heritage. Freedom of religion is indeed our first freedom. being the first listed right of our First Amendment. This has been a core American principle from the beginning. It is one of the reasons that this country was settled in the first place. This promise of freedom of conscience brought the Pilgrims to Plymouth, the Catholics to Maryland, the Quakers to Pennsylvania, and the Scott Presbyterians to the Middle Colonies, and Roger Williams to Rhode Island.
And the reason for that was that they couldn't get along with each other
Right.
in the same state, and in fact were prohibited by law in some states from even moving there.
Are
Thank
you saying they weren't for freedom of religion?
They were for freedom of my religion, whatever
Yes.
that happens to be, okay? If you're silly enough to disagree with me, you don't deserve freedom of religion, and anything I have in store for you is just a tiny sample of what the Almighty has in store for you for being wrong on the question of who
Which
most
religion?
who most to, well, I won't say it.
Okay.
Well, and the other, no one is talking about stopping them from thinking and even worshiping the way they want to, although we do restrict worship of other religions. Pastafarians can't smoke, or not Pastafarians, Rastafarians. Pastafarians can eat all the pasta they want. Rastafarians can't smoke dope and or pot, and the Santeria people can't sacrifice
No,
animals.
they have allowed them to do
Well,
that now
oh,
in
yeah, I
Florida.
guess, okay.
At any rate, I don't know about nationwide. but
Yeah.
They have allowed them to do that in Florida. They can now
And
sacrifice.
Pastafarians can eat all the spaghetti they want, but with meatballs.
But
It has to have
I do have to
meatballs.
think that the fact that they're restricted to, that's not a restriction, I guess it's just sort of leveled out at around 35,000 different Christian denominations that is doing, maybe around $1 trillion tax-free dollars a year.
Yes,
God, I wish they'd take advantage of me like that.
yes.
Please persecute me.
I had a thought, now I've lost
Willing
it
to
because it's
force it on
cracking
you
up.
if you wish.
Oh, but the thing comes when your rights start intruding on my rights. And that's the 14th Amendment. And so I don't have any problem with people thinking whatever they want to think. They can say whatever they want to say. But I have a problem when they act in such a way that is unconstitutional. And to me, like when a business starts in a state and they know what the state laws are, like serving everyone who walks in their door, if they're going to be open to the public, then they have an obligation to do that.
A secular country,
Yes.
of which the United States is the first, foremost, and so far probably one of the best examples, should not be conducting religious activities on the government nickel under any circumstances.
Exactly.
We don't need any more faith-based initiatives.
No,
we don't
we
need any
don't.
more, what does he call this?
Oh, this
The
is
Religious
Religious
Liberty,
Yeah,
Summit.
the Religious Liberties Council.
Yes.
Yes.
Sounds like the, my.
It just takes it all out of you.
We
doesn't
shouldn't be conducting these sorts of things in the first place. That's my point. I thought we settled this issue. Well, we'll get on with that.
it? Yeah, well, because there's quite a lot here that we need to consider.
And it's
He
all
says-
bad.
It's none of it's too good. I'll have to say that. He says our founders gave religious expression a double protection in the First Amendment. Not only do we possess freedom to exercise our beliefs, but we also enjoy the freedom of speech. Our founders' understanding of and commitment to religious freedom was truly brilliant as well as historic. Well, that much I think I would tend to agree with him. It was brilliant and historic.
But
It arose in a large time from the principles
He's the first to
delineated in
notice.
the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom and its effective advocates, Madison and Jefferson. Well, in that bit at least, I think he was on kind of the right trail. Would you agree?
Yes, I do. Mhm.
I also agree.
Twisting the realities of those events
Yes.
will be the next thing out of his mouth, I'm
Yes.
guessing.
You think so? Well, maybe. These guys, he says, were ferocious. The weekend he gave the speech, he was rereading the Gary Willis fabulous book, Head and Heart, in which he quotes extensively from Jefferson's statute, as he refers to it. I commend all of it to you. One line stood out in particular to me, quote, that Almighty God hath created the mind free and manifested his supreme will, that free it shall remain by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint. In other words, Jefferson held the free mind as the most significant and important product of the American revolutionary moment.
No, God.
Right,
God.
it says it came from God. Which,
Well, yeah, see.
which, if that were true, is at 180 degrees to the way they operate.
Yes, absolutely. Because they certainly do not want to allow others to think freely or to act on their beliefs.
If you don't agree with me, you're going to be tortured for all eternity.
Yes.
How much more of closer to extortion do you have to get other than just pulling out a gun and showing up? Hi, I'm with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've got a gun and a ski mask, and I want to talk to you about Jesus.
And
That's
I
the
believe
next step.
everything you tell me.
Yes, ma'am. I'm with you.
Well, but I do think that insofar as the free mind goes, that notion itself is something that I as an atheist, I think all of us here would agree, is something that is the very summit of human aspiration, both at that time and in our own time, because the very notion of religious freedom itself derives from the idea that human beings are the ones who will decide about a great many issues. And deciding about other issues is the fact that we have a station break coming up right now.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com.
That's the place to go, folks, to learn more about what we really stand for. And so let's continue with this conversation. But before that, we're going to have a quote of the day, one of our favorite things. And this time, Judy has it for us. Go ahead.
And interestingly enough, I'm going to be quoting Thomas Jefferson. Mr. Jefferson stated, "Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burnt, tortured, fined, and imprisoned. Yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity. What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half the world fools and the other half hypocrites, to support roguery and error all over the earth." Doesn't sound to me like something that Sessions would be.
Hey, if Thomas Jefferson is good enough for Attorney General Sessions, he's good enough for me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, things that are just good enough. Well, speaking of that, let's continue on with our analysis. And let me read another quote for your dining and dancing delectation. "For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." This is what our founders believed. They clearly recognized that an individual's relationship to God is a natural right and precedes the existence of the state and is not subject to state control. What do you think about this? There's some
Your
elements to it that
relationship
we-
with God ought to be subject to state control.
No, it's not subject to state
it's
control.
not? Oh, okay.
That's what he says.
Because I thought, well, that's an impeachable phrase.
It would be.
That'll get you thrown off Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that too is from the Jefferson statute, so it's another Jefferson quote.
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree that there should be no state control over thought of any sort, for or against God or whatever. But, Joe, you want to
Well,
say?
no, the entire Christian religion is based on the idea that you ought to be punished for what you think.
Yes,
As,
exactly.
insofar as if what you think isn't what I think.
Yes.
And to punish someone a little bit or for all eternity for a difference of opinion, I think I've made this statement many times, is probably one of the most vile ideas on this planet.
One of the things that comes to mind, of course, is the punishment of Mormons for polygamy. Even though there's plenty of polygamy in the Bible, and I know that they use this term differently, but all the nuns that are brides of Christ, does make Christ a polygamist?
Good question.
Well, theoretically or virtually, perhaps.
Yes.
Before we go too much further, this is a call-in show. So therefore, if you have a thought that you'd like to for the audience and the world to consider, give us a call at 727-441-3000. Or you can call toll-free at 1-886-826-1349. And we will certainly be most interested to hear anything you have to say.
And it's free to call us no matter which number you call from.
That's
Yeah.
It doesn't cost a penny to insult an atheist.
No, it does not. Please do.
And I will also say that we are live casting on YouTube, both on our Atheist Forum channel and on the Tan Talk radio channel. If you're at home and want to tune in and see who these heathens are, we're in plain view on YouTube
Yeah, we're nice. I mean, you know,
most of the time.
innocent and
Just so I don't use my real name.
who knows what that might be.
One of the things that I wanted to, speaking of coming under state law, and that's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was passed in 1993, I believe, although it was not upheld in the Supreme Court for states. They couldn't enforce this on states, but a lot of states, including Florida, passed their own RFRA, is what we call it, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And that was used predominantly to help minority religions, because, especially Native American religions, because the government was not respecting the rights of those groups. And it has been completely turned on its head by these people to be used to protect Christianity and other major religions.
It sounds to me as if it was originally intended as some sort of religious affirmative action, because, well, maybe some of these religions have been neglected. I mean, you know, the bigger religions get all the tax breaks and
Yes.
such. We're already subsidizing them, but it's still not the job of the government to step in and subsidize these religions that feel like they're, as if they're being left out. They can't be being left out by the government because the government's not supposed to touch them in the first place. So they're interfering with the right to commerce. They're interfering with, pardon me, free trade and capitalism, and they're interfering with the First Amendment.
Well,
For
one of the
starters.
things that they did with RFRA was, speaking of interfering with capitalism, was they were protecting lands of the Native Americans that were considered religious, spiritual lands, and keeping development off of those lands, which I have mixed feelings about.
Give them a deed.
Yeah, give them a deed. Yes, exactly, and let them have ownership of what they should
Put a
have.
deed on it.
Yeah.
Let's continue on for another part here. There can be no doubt, General Sessions says, that
I doubt it already. That's an
that we are
alarm bell.
stronger as a nation because of the contribution of religious Americans. Every day across America, they feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, educate our young people, and care for the sick. They do so not because the government tells them to, but because they want to. They do these things because of their faith. Their faith provides something the state could never provide, meaning and purpose and joy in their life. But in recent years, the cultural climate in this country and in the West more generally has become less hospitable to people of faith. Well, let's consider, however, the basic thesis here. They provide the religious people provide food for the hungry and shelter for the homeless, education for young people, and care for the sick. Are these not really state functions? And
Yes.
shouldn't they be?
They should be state functions.
Yes, they should. Healthcare ought not to be a commodity.
Exactly. It is not, it is a right. It's not a privilege.
And the argument that they do this because it makes them feel good, there may be some feel good about it, but they also do it because they get paid rather generously to do it by the government. And the fact that it makes them feel good is almost totally irrelevant. Get rid of the word religion here and put in the word bourbon or masturbation and see how the argument works. It's the same argument.
Yes.
It would be bad, I think, if we were dependent upon religion to supply us with, say, health care.
It is
And
bad,
if-
and I'll tell you why it's bad.
Well, let me tell you.
Ask Mary Baker
See,
Eddy why it's bad.
If healthcare depends upon whether or not those who administer it feel good about it, and if they stop feeling good about it, we wouldn't have any healthcare.
As someone who's been entrenched in the healthcare system in the past few years, I can tell you that the majority of hospitals in Hillsborough County are religious-based. You walk in, you see all these pictures of God's creation. I mean, they're very nice pictures of space and the universe and everything.
Very attractive.
Very pretty. But that's part of what you have to deal with, and people wanting to pray for you, or if you're in a Catholic hospital, the crucifix, they can refuse to give service to people based on their religious beliefs, not what I need. If I'm dying and need an abortion, I can't. It's very difficult to find a place that's going to do it because the majority of hospitals in Hillsborough County, at least, are religious controlled. And there are other in vitro fertilization and other things that people use now because science has advanced that can be denied to people. That should not be. Healthcare should be what be a decision between the doctor and the person who needs the healthcare. Just like euthanasia. If somebody wants to terminate their life because they're suffering, there should not be a religious objection allowed to overrule that decision.
And if you're going to allow religious objections to things, the types of things that you just mentioned, whose religion do we
Exactly.
get to object to? There's 10,000 different religions. As I said earlier, 35,000 different denominations just within Christianity alone. So if we're going to use religion to decide what to do with someone's reproductive organs, I think Priapus is the best example.
Well, now,
Follow there.
I don't know what that is.
Is a fertility god.
Oh, okay.
Priapism,
explain these
priapism is a
things,
disease where you have a constant erection.
Okay.
okay, that's not something Judy is likely to have.
No, I'm not likely to have that.
Anyway, the Attorney General has, however, gone to the trouble of
I meant
providing us.
one has.
Okay. Providing us with an example of just such a thing. Recently, a district court in Colorado issued a permanent injunction in a case involving the Little Sisters of the Poor,
Right.
a group of nuns who serve the elderly poor. This is a permanent injunction and a major victory for the Little Sisters and religious freedom, he says. The government has no business telling the Little Sisters that they must provide an insurance policy that violates their sincere religious beliefs. So what are we to make of this? Are not the religious groups and religious people obligated to live with the same law as the rest of us?
Why, of
even though
course
that law
not.
may
Apparently
provide-
not. They are apart from the law, not just above it, okay?
And
How is it that we can force Lester Maddox to go against his deeply held religious beliefs and serve people of any race who just happen to stumble into his restaurant? I thought we settled this issue 50 years ago.
Yes, we do.
And it wasn't even that they were going to make them provide birth control and their health insurance, they asked them to fill out a form.
Yeah, right.
And they were going to give them an exemption. And it was too much of a burden to them to fill out a form saying they objected to providing birth control.
Well, of course, their real objection was not the form or anything of that sort. It was the very idea.
Yes. And
Yeah,
this is where we're headed, is getting many forms of birth control banned because it's a religious objection. And not just abortion, but many kinds of birth control will be
And
banned.
this is the siege, this is the attack that Mr. Sessions wants to arrest.
Yes.
The idea that people ought to have control over their own lives
Yes,
is anathema to
absolutely.
Jefferson Beauregard Sessions.
Yes.
Speaking of which, for those of our listeners who may not recall 50 years ago and who Lester Maddox was, he was a restaurant owner who took an axe handle to prevent black customers from attending his restaurant.
The Pickwick Restaurant.
Oh, okay, very good. And
Atlanta.
in Atlanta, and he made quite a campaign out of it. And he was in fact elected governor of Georgia.
He served as
at the
assistant
time.
governor too, I think.
Okay. And at any rate, it was a pretty reprehensible thing to do. I think we would all acknowledge that today.
Yes.
But at the time, of course, there was a good deal of support for Mr. Maddox's position.
Enough to get him elected governor.
Yes, exactly.
And his behavior as an overt racist only seemed to help his standing among those who followed him. I'm happy to note that we've overcome a lot of that. And
Well, we had up until
now.
Jefferson Beauregard Sessions came along.
And I can't help but feel much of this is a result of Obama and the racism. Not everybody who supports
Right.
Trump
No.
is a racist, I will say that. But I think a large majority of those people are racist.
The backlash to 8 years of black.
Yes,
is
exactly.
definitely a pendulum swing.
Yes.
And, Trump tells 16 lies a day on average,
Yes.
I read.
Which is,
And-
again,
no,
in
no, no.
Leviticus.
Oh, yeah, right. But the minute,
7.5.
but the minute you
7.5.
mention that to Trumpsters, they point out, well, I didn't get to keep my position, and they point out 3 or 4 things
Right.
where Obama may have been lying. He may have been honestly mistaken. Okay, but
Who
he comes
knew
up with
that-
3 lies in 8 years.
Yeah.
Trump does 16 lies a day. No problem.
Right,
No problem.
And-
Is that selective viewing at its worst?
exactly.
Have you got your head in your sand?
And it is
Sand.
the whole Christian cafeteria Christian thing, where they will eat pork, but if I'm gay, I can't get married because it's against the Bible.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit here. He says, among other things, we don't give up our rights when we assemble or join together. We have religious freedom as individuals and as groups. In short, we have not only the freedom to worship, but the freedom to exercise our faith. The Constitution's protections don't end at the parish parking lot, nor can our freedoms be confined to our basements. What do you think that means?
Well, I think he's setting up an argument to attempt to knock down the Johnson Agreement.
Yes.
And allow ministers in various religious organizations to have unfettered access to raise money and endorse candidates. And I'd have to say I support that. 1 minute after they begin to tax all religions just like any other business, which is what they are, then they can say what they want to say. Until then, that's the deal. You stay out of politics, we'll stay out of your church. You want to break that rule? Fine.
It'll
39% is the I think it's the maximum tax rate at this point. Let's start with that.
Well, that may well be changing. Around the world, churches, religions are being asked to contribute tax-wise. In
No.
Europe-
They need to be told to contribute.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
of course. Didn't I say? Well, anyway,
You said asked.
they are being asked, that's
Right.
true.
Just like you're asked. Why
Like,
don't you
pay
pay your
up.
taxes or we'll put you
Yeah.
in jail?
Yeah,
That's-
Can I
that's the
not
essence
pay
of
that
it.
portion of my taxes that goes towards war since I'm a pacifist?
Can't I hold
No,
back the part that goes to religion?
no, no.
I mean, this flies in the face of my sincerely held anti-religious
Yes, it
beliefs.
does. Mine too.
I'm so tired of getting things flying in my face.
Yeah,
And when they talk about groups, they go on to say that includes businesses because of like the Hobby Lobby and those people that don't want to pay for, that want to impose their view on their employees.
Yeah, he goes on to say, under this administration, the federal government is not just reacting, we are actively seeking carefully, thoughtfully, and lawfully to accommodate people of faith. Religious Americans are no longer an afterthought. We will take potential burdens on one's conscience into consideration before we issue regulations or new policies.
Considering that there are whole libraries full of long, complicated tomes on the subject of religious faith, how are we going to establish which people's views we want to accommodate? Because if we wanted to accommodate all of them, it seems to me that government would just cease to function, just grind to a halt out of the sheer inability to do that. It would become a 24-hour-a-day bookkeeping task, and that's about all they could
Well,
possibly keep up
This
with.
is Christian nationalism. It's not anything else. They are not going to respect other religious views.
So that ain't going to stop the other religions from banging on the
No,
door.
it is not. It is not.
Would you care to tell us a little bit more about Christian nationalism, the hegemony of Christianity over the nation's fate? Would you like to talk about that a little bit more?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to do that, but in terms of, because they see this as a Christian nation, they are working on, in my opinion, plans to make this a theocracy based on Christianity.
They say so. It's
Yes,
not
they
like it's
do.
a secret.
I know.
You know, so.
Yeah. And moves like this, even RIFRA was, as much as I...
Riffraff.
Riffraff, yes. Even RIFRA was a move that I didn't support, even though the ACLU did, because it's like a sliding slope. It's just
right.
Going down that path to abuse by the majority, what's considered the majority religion, although they are not the majority anymore. And that's another reason why they do not want to, that they're having such great difficulty now, and this is like a last gasp effort to get their position in control and take over all aspects of our lives.
Oh, yeah. The more successful we become, and other free thinkers and secularists such as ourselves, the more desperate they will become. I hate to sound so repetitive, but they're not going to give up $1 trillion cash cow without blood.
Right.
Who would?
And it's not that all Christians support this either, because there are a number of religious groups that, Christian groups specifically, that do not want a theocracy. They want to keep a secular nation because
We
they
work
know.
with some of those groups.
Yes, we do.
ourselves.
Absolutely.
And they know that this would not be a good thing for them or for the rest of the population.
Americans United for Separation of
Yes.
Church and State is a Baptist-founded and funded organization.
Right.
Baptists.
And we are, as a nation, invested more in the idea of freedom than in the idea of protecting those who would restrict that freedom, and which is what we have
Great point.
here as a case. Another thing he said was, in January, we, that is the Justice Department, filed a brief in Montana court to defend parents who claim that the state banned their children from a private school scholarship program because they attend a religious school. We also filed an amicus brief on behalf of the Archdiocese of Washington, which was refused advertising space for having a religious message, including joy to the world on Merry Christmas. There's that war on Christmas, a favorite theme.
Yes.
It keeps coming back again and again. And of course, we were proud to file a brief on behalf of Jack Phillips, who you may recall was that fellow in the bakery who
Cake-
refused
cake and
to supply
Queens,
cake.
yeah.
Even though he had a public business that served the
That's a Lester
public.
Maddox analogy.
Yes,
Of
exactly.
the first right there.
In this case, it's let them not eat cake. So,
But this is a move to get vouchers for religious schools. We are creeping into that in Florida, especially, where we just passed that bill that if your child is bullied, we will let them go to a private school of their choice, religious or not, and give you vouchers to send them. Why don't they deal with the bullying? Because that's where they need to counsel those students who are doing the bullying. And what you're going to end up with is all the good students are in private schools, and the public schools, as little as they will exist, deal with the problem children.
Right. I don't go to elementary school. I go to Fight Club.
But that is the move to provide vouchers and not be able to refuse vouchers to private schools. And Trump has said this out loud, they should be able to get vouchers whether they were religious or not if they want to go to a private school. School choice. Yeah, everybody supports choice.
Yeah, the number, once they got rid of school prayer and integrated the schools, the number of private, particularly religious schools, went from a handful to tens of thousands overnight. And ever since then, from day one, the people who send their children to those schools have been trying to find ways to let the rest of us pay for it, just like the rest of us already are paying for their cathedral that sits there as a monument to gullibility.
Yes.
Empty most of the time.
And as a childless person, I don't mind paying taxes to support schools because I know that's important for our society. But I do mind religious indoctrination in any school. But if you want to send your child to a religious school, then fine, do that. You pay for it.
Yeah.
Of course, ultimately, we would like to see children have the freedom to make their own decisions on religion. And I think personally that it is wrong to make any child grow up with religious indoctrination of any kind. We still have a few minutes yet here, and let's consider something else the Attorney General brought up, and that was a suit recently in New Jersey where to let an Orthodox Jewish congregation buy land for a synagogue that had been refused for 8 years. And then also he cites another case of a Hindu temple in Maryland that claimed they suffered discrimination in their attempts to purchase land. And he says they want to keep going to court, and he believes they're going to keep on winning. But in this particular case where congregations of legitimate people with apparently legitimate reasons want to go out and put up a religious institution of some kind were denied that access, he may have a point. But on the other hand, you could also look at this same thing and ask the question, well, were these applications in violation of zoning laws?
And do they take vast swaths of land out of the tax rolls?
Yeah, well,
look at downtown Clearwater.
Well,
Yeah.
there is that, of course. Yeah, but I mean that is the sort of thing where the dominant religion will exercise restraints, unconstitutional restraints, I suspect, on these less dominant religions. And to that measure, I think he has a point. So it's not entirely the case that this is an unrelieved evil.
Well, yeah,
but on the other hand...
But this is religions discriminating against each other.
That's right.
It's not secularists or other of us who like to wage war on Christmas. It's not terrible abominations such as ourselves.
Each other is their favorite target.
Yeah.
I mean,
We
they're in
would
competition.
have to look that up and know why they were denied. But the thing that concerns me, and I know Joe concerns you too, and Jim, is the stacking of the court by Trump. I know we don't have time to go in this today, but we would be remiss in not mentioning the stacking of the court with Trump appointees from I can't remember, the Federalist Society, which is a fundamentalist Christian group, and the people who are being appointed are going to eat this stuff up, and our liberties are just going to go down the tube in the court system.
Hopefully, soon enough, we'll be able to punish people for what they think,
Yes.
which is, of course, the dream of every tyrant
Yes.
who ever lived at any level.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think we're coming. Well, we still have a few minutes yet, just a few. And I wondered if anyone would like to come up with any concluding thoughts. Joe, would you like to take a minute?
I got about 1 minute to
Minutes
talk
worth of
about
thoughts.
Jeff
I have something I
Sessions.
need to bring up.
Yeah,
though.
okay, sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There is a House bill called H.R. 3222, the Do No Harm Act, which the ACLU and some other groups are sponsoring, and which would prevent the discrimination against others on the basis of religious belief. It is imperative that you contact your legislator in support of this bill. That's H.R. 3222. So look it up and contact your legislator and support this bill to prevent.
That's a federal,
Yes, I'm sorry, it's a federal House bill.
Always a good idea. Always a good idea for everybody to stay in contact with their Congress critters
Yes.
and let them know what
Yes.
they think.
Yeah.
Joe, what do you have?
well, if someone had told me that I could spend the better part of an hour talking about Jefferson Beauregard Sessions without either killing myself or vomiting, I would have said that I didn't think it was possible. What it is possible to talk about him, particularly since we do get a little opportunity for rebuttal. I guarantee you I couldn't sit here and listen to him for an hour or 2 minutes.
No, me either.
And so this brings us once more to the end of our show. I would only add to everything that's been said by a couple of very brilliant people that religious freedom is your freedom. You are the ones who ultimately have the right to express your ideas about the nature of our world and your place in it, and whether or not there is a God is something that you have in particular. So in conclusion, we hope you'll join us again next week on the Atheist Forum, and along with Judy Atkins and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Jim Peterson, reminding you the story seems a little too implausible to be true. Don't believe it just because someone wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
Prove it. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistsoflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.